Hello, everyone, and welcome to Schmidtless Live. I am your host, Kurt Schmidt, president and partner at Foundry, and I am so excited that you are joining me today because I have a good friend of mine, and we're going to be talking about psychological safety. What is it? What does it mean? How can I achieve this mythical status? How can I get my team to get excited about it? We're going to talk about all those things today. But before I jump in, I do have to mention, of course, we are hiring at Foundry. So check out the new graphic here, which it's like, wait, I'm doing it wrong. There it is. foundrymakes.com/career. Check it out. Hiring a lot of new positions. Plus we've got even more coming. So keep an eye on that. And let's jump right in and talk about psychological safety with Tara. Tara, how are you today?
Hi, Kurt. I'm great. How are you doing?
Oh, I'm so much better now that you are here. I'm excited for how intelligent you are going to make me look today.
Oh, okay.
So tell me about where you're at. What is the name of the company?
I'm with Industrial Logic.
Industrial Logic, yeah. And what do you do there?
So I am a coach. I would call myself an organizational coach. So I've worked with folks on the product side, also around organizational behavior, kind of a myriad of things, and to help people build better products. But most importantly, recognizing kind of where we're coming from in terms of behavior and looking at that from an agility perspective just as much as what we're building.
And why is that so important in the tech space? You and I both have worked in the tech space. Why do we talk so much about things like emotional intelligence and psychological safety and these sorts of things? Why aren't we talking about ones and zeros more often?
I think we've tried that, and the end result was not super desirable. I think the reason that we've started talking about it more is we're recognizing the more we talk about products, the more we talk about humans. And at the end of the day, it's humans who are creating these things. So if you just throw a pile of people together and say, go build something without a lot of context for one another, we're not going to really get to the outcomes that we're striving for. But if we really relate to one another in terms of all aspects of being human when we're working, which is being afraid of taking risks, making sure we feel included, being able to have more open conversations around that, it's going to lead to way more dynamic discussions and more innovative work.
Yeah, and I think it is timely because I still run into so many people that think if you put people together, that's a team. Like just put them together makes them a team. I mean, I don't know if you watch Ted Lasso, but it's very popular right now, and it's funny because that's why he's successful, because he's building a team. He's not just putting a bunch of soccer players together. And so it's something that I reference even at my company and other people that I talk to, is that just putting people together with similar titles on the same project does not a team equate.
Yes, absolutely. And I'm glad you brought up Ted Lasso because I'm a big fan. And when my partner and I watched it, I was freaking out the whole time. I just kept saying, like, this is coaching. This is exactly
Yes.
what coaching is.
Right.
This is, getting people to feel uncomfortable. Maybe they don't like an idea that you threw out there, but it's going to get them thinking and it's going to get them challenging themselves in different ways. And you're also going to learn a ton too. The purpose of being a coach, and I've spoken with a lot of folks about this through the years. Everybody has a different idea as to what a coach is.
Yeah.
But really, a coach isn't there to teach you all the things. They're there to help guide, but also learn for ourselves. Like, I don't know everything, and I certainly don't know everything about your space. And I definitely don't know everything about human behavior. No one does. So it's really about us kind of building something new together.
Yeah, and everybody's unique. So let's talk about our theme today, psychological safety. What does that even mean? How should I be defining that when I hear that term or people throwing about that term? How should I be thinking about it? What is it?
Sure. Well, I think that we're starting to hear it a lot more, especially since, the beginning of 2020 when, COVID hit and everything started happening. There was a lot of focus on psychological safety, and you'd see the word showing up everywhere. I guess I like to start by talking about what psychological safety isn't first. So it's not just about It's not about feeling, super comfortable and cozy and feeling kind of protected. That can often be a byproduct of it. But psychological safety is really about creating an ecosystem together with individuals where we support one another, where people don't feel afraid to use their voice, where they don't feel judged, and they also don't feel punished. So if I'm having a conversation with a leader in the room and I want to make a suggestion, I'm not feeling like, ooh, if I make this suggestion, am I going to get in trouble? Will my review be impacted? Am I going to get pulled aside after this conversation? It's allowing people to really use their voice for the greater good to build better things.
Yeah, and is this something that is a bottom up approach, or when you're coaching, is this a top down approach? Because so many folks, that I run into that are leaders, they're like, this team needs help, and so they'll bring in a coach, and it's not the team that necessarily needs the help. But I'm glad you brought us in anyways. What's your experience tell you where the opportunity usually lies?
Right. That's an excellent question. I don't think there's necessarily one answer for it. I will say more often than not, I have seen this successfully begin within pockets of organizations. And what I mean by that is even starting with a team, there have been teams that I've worked with within larger organizations where there really wasn't much safety. But when we start to actively build it, and we're not just saying psychological safety is a thing, here's how you know if you have it or if you don't, it's like, okay, well, then what? If we start putting things into practice and start actually building it and start letting leaders see that, it can be kind of an organic experience of them seeing, oh, wow, I wonder what this could do for our executive team, because I think a lot of times they kind of wait until they see it from other sides.
Sure.
In other circumstances, and I think it's definitely for the benefit of many, is when executives see, you know what, I think this is something that we should start looking at larger as an organization. And that's something that is absolutely impactful too. I think at the end of the day, leadership and executives do need to be aware that this is not like a fluffy thing. There's a lot of data that backs kind of the neuroscience behind like why we don't want to be just functioning with like our amygdalas in overdrive and like only, which is like your fight, flight, response, constantly being worried about your behavior, but rather you're able to really bring what you have to the table, because we're not hiring people to be robots. When we look at resumes, and I've been a manager in the past, when we look at resumes, we're hiring people for the skills that they have. We're hiring them to be a good culture fit, and we want them to bring their full selves forward. And to really be able to do that, they need to be able to have a safe place to do that in.
Yeah. And so back to your point about the data side of it, I think where some leaders struggle is the measurement of this, right? How do I measure? Do I have 40% more psychological safety? Do I, how do you look at it when it comes to, when you're working with a client over time, how do you sort of measure the impact and the trajectory of that psychological safety, or the team just meshing better as a whole?
Sure. So over the years, I've played with a few different tools, all of them homegrown, collaborating with others like Team Health, that kind of thing. And then last year, I discovered that Amy Edmondson co-founded a group that was putting together a cohort for the Fearless organization, which is her book that really kind of pioneered the term psychological safety. And part of being one of those practitioners meant you got to have access to a tool that actually measures it. There are, I think, 80 people who are practitioners, and I think they're capping it at 100. I don't remember exactly the amount, but I kind of fought and clawed my way to get into this program, and went through it about 3 months ago. And it was honestly one of the greatest experiences I've had in terms of collective coaching. But one of the greatest things that comes out of it is now having a tool where there are 4 different dimensions, and actually being able to measure that, even using metadata with teams, with leaders, with executives, anyone and everyone in the organization, that you can measure over time to say, where are we stuck? Where are we making progress? And then also looking at the work you produce and saying, this is how it might be impacting things. So we now actually have a tool where we're able to really utilize the measurement piece. And I'm a data nerd, obviously, work in IT. So I really love being able to have something powerful where we're actually able to gauge where folks are at in an anonymous way, but have a collective conversation and really get real about what's going on.
Is the anonymity of it important?
Absolutely. Yes. If a manager came to me and said, oh, I really want to know what Carl said about me, it's a data breach. I literally cannot share that information. I will share as a group how things came out, and there will be a discussion, and we kind of build an intentionally safe container to have that discussion. So doing something like a working agreement, folks are familiar with that, I'm sure, in tech, or like a social contract to say, here are things that we're going to hold ourselves to. And these are things that I expect to get out of this conversation so that you can really show up and kind of let your guard down. And I'll say that, I've had some folks say, but what if people don't, they're afraid to bring themselves forward, and you get out of it what you put into it. But I'll tell you, there have been so many times where I've run the scan and people who I thought wouldn't say a word end up just cracking open like an egg and sharing all of this really important stuff, and having a leader in the room say, I had no idea that was even a problem, or I didn't know that this was standing in your way. Let's find a way to get around it so that we can be more successful, and also people can be more happy because it leads to retainment topics as well.
So let's say I'm watching this show right now, and maybe I'm not a leader, but maybe I'm on a team. What advice would you have for me to help instill more psychological safety in my team without having to necessarily wait for a Tara or a coach and everybody to come in? But as an individual contributor, a person who's on the team that wants the team to improve, what can I be doing? Is there something I can do tomorrow?
Absolutely. Yes. I love that question. I think that it really does lie with, it has to start with individuals first. So a lot of what I coach is, it starts with self. If we don't start with self and like really knowing who we are, we're going to have a much harder time being open and being transparent with other people. So I would say to that individual, really get to know what drives you, what makes you really impassioned, what shuts you down, and start having those conversations within your team during retrospectives or even out to lunch, just having conversations that are bringing the human piece into the work piece, because we're not two separate people. We're there just as ourselves. But until we start really recognizing that, it's tough to do. And I'll give an example. So in a former life, I was a project manager, and I was not a great one, and it was not my favorite thing to do. So now when I work with teams or I work with leaders and I sense anything, if I'm asked to do something that sounds kind of project management-y, I have this internal sensor where I'm like, I know this is a thing for you. So just listen and take a pause. And my response, everybody has, I've mentioned before, like fight, flight, fawn. There's 5 of them. Everybody has a different response, and it's different in different situations. I know for me, it's definitely flight. So I'll just be like, okay, I don't want to really listen to this anymore. Bye. This isn't my strong suit. But the problem with that is my brain is detecting a threat, but I really don't know if it is one, because I'm not sure that I'm actually listening. So my point is to really listen to yourself internally and start to know, like, the way that you respond in those human interactions and situations. Think about situations where things get heated in a meeting or a refinement session or whatever it might be, where you are triggered in some way, and kind of dig into that. Like, why did I respond that way? How could I have maybe approached that better? And if you bring that to a team and you start addressing that collectively, you're going to learn a lot more about the way that people work, and you're going to work better as a cohesive group. And also, it's more fun to just be yourself and not have to present this, image of what you think. It's called impression management, but we can project, like, this is how I think I should act. I'm in front of someone who's, a director. So I'm going to make sure, like, I wear my best outfit and I'm much more poised, and I'm maybe not being honest or forthcoming about something. It's important to check yourself with that stuff, and find someone even on your team who can help you kind of stay accountable with that sort of thing.
Yeah, it's funny because there's more emotional labor involved, in my opinion, in putting up that front than there is just being yourself. So you think you're protecting yourself, but you're actually weighing down yourself a lot more. Yeah, I have a personal experience to share that's very similar to what you talked about, Tara. Many years ago, I remember somebody had mentioned to me, like similar to what you had said, is knowing what my triggers were. So I went through a week of work and I had a notebook with me and I would write down anything that triggered me. So, and I put it in like this bucket of like 1, 2, 3, and like 3 was like really triggered and 1 was just annoyed or whatever. And 2 is wherever I couldn't fit it in the other places. And I went through the week and I started recognizing these things and I started bucketing them. And then the important thing was then I went to other people on my team and I shared these things, and other people were like, oh, that triggers me too. Or this, I started this conversation. A few other people even did the same exercise, and it opened up this kind of interesting conversation with the rest of the team. But exactly to your point, Tara, that if you're waiting for somebody to fly in and handle this all for you, I wouldn't count on it.
No, that's not going to happen. I love that you did that, though. That's super introspective, and it's also very, action based. I think that so many times when we talk about agility and how we build products with teams, like we're always looking to go, go, go. All we're hearing is like more, faster.
Yep.
Like that applies so much pressure, but there's all these other emotions in the underbelly of what's happening. And if we're not being honest about them, they're still there, and you're going to see it in different ways. So it's really good to start to learn. Like it'll also, I know that you just did an awesome talk about burnout. Like it's really important to know when you're reaching that point before you reach it. So if you can kind of track some of that stuff and know, if the people on your team start to get to know you more and more as you all start to open up. And it's not so much in like a kumbaya way. It's really just about like being real with people and saying, you know what, you seem super burnt out right now. Are you okay? And trying to kind of pay attention to that for yourself and for other people so that there's kind of a shared awareness.
Yeah, because I think there's a process to it, right? I think there's some people that approach it in a way that can be very conflict, like it's just very conflict focused, where they're like, I just tell it like it is, and they say things like that, and it's like,
I love that.
And but again, it's like you're not helping anybody because you haven't done the work personally to understand why these things are triggering you, or why you're saying what you're saying or what you're doing. You just have removed the filter because you feel like that is going to help you get further along, right? So, I mean, I've been in meetings with people that are very yelly type people, right? They like to yell and stomp and make everybody very uncomfortable, and then they wonder later why people are still dwelling on those things. They're like, I'm over it, so why are people still, still talking about it? Like it's just I was just telling it like it is, and it's like, that's not productive. Right. No. And I'm always shocked that these people who do that, react that way, feel like they're getting something productive out. Maybe it's that they're parting people, they're keeping people further away from them. And that's helping them because they can't handle the emotional labor of the people around them. But if you were to, what are some of the questions you initially ask when you go in and talk to maybe a leader who's considering, having you come in and help? What are some of the things that you like to know up front before you really start to dive in? What are some of the things I should be taking stock of as a leader before I enter into these sorts of ideas?
I guess first I'd like to know, I kind of want to go back a moment to something that you said and then answer that. So I think that it's so crucial when people react that way. I refer to that as brutal honesty, but honesty never needs to be brutal. In that case, it's almost an attachment to that sort of behavior of like needing to have that knee-jerk reaction. And as someone who was brought up in a family with 2 very loud East Coast parents, I know full well that that's like a thing. And that's just how some people really feel that they communicate. And so what I really try and do when I meet with leaders, and I don't have any understanding, I try and go in with no expectations, no, as little of a bias as we can. We all have them because we're human, but I really want to know what their relationship is like with their teams and with those individuals. And from there, I can really start to gauge things like, what is their communication style like? Are they practicing empathy? Are they an active listener? Do they understand the practices of giving and receiving feedback? And what does that communication loop look like in terms of expectations with the people who you work with, whether or not they even report to you? But are people really encouraged to share? Do they even have an opportunity to do so? I mentioned that I was an engineering manager for a few years, and I was really brought in as someone who, because I've been coaching for almost a decade now, and I was really brought in to really help with the cultural and the behavioral side of things. And what I really saw was, so many leaders have so much pressure on, like, you have to focus on the project or the product. And then there's the people piece, but the people piece almost always ends up coming last. And we need to figure out better ways to kind of balance things, where I think if we recognize that if you put more care and more intent behind the relationship you have with people, that stuff actually comes organically. And you can see it right in the numbers. Like, as you start to produce more things, not just the numbers of, like, let's say users or, usage, also numbers in retainment, employee satisfaction. I've worked with human resources groups in the past where they were really having a hard time with turnover. And really a lot of it is about just listening and acting like you care and giving people a platform to speak. Now, I think that, as a leader, you also have to be cognizant of those pieces of delivery. Those things aren't going to go away. But I also think that there's a way to really bring the human work into the fold, so that stuff almost becomes a little less noisy, actually quite a bit less noisy, if you really have a more full picture of what's going on. Because I've also experienced as a manager, things blow up and it's like it came out of nowhere. Like, you're expecting to get this feature done, something blows up and you're like, how did that not get done in time? Well, guess what? This person over here, had tested something like 3 times. They knew it was broken, but they also knew that we had no option and they pushed it anyway. This is kind of an extreme scenario, but I don't know if you've seen the Challenger documentary, which was, I think it was on Netflix, but it's all about the Challenger explosion. And it just broke. I mean, so much of that is about psychological safety. I mean, there was a guy who sent a fax, and he's still clearly completely traumatized by what happened. He said, I had my finger on that button on that fax machine and I could have not sent it, but I did, because I was so afraid to say, we need to pause this because there had been delays. It was expensive. And this is what not in such an extreme version, but so many of us hear things like this. Right. But if we really want to be practicing agility, and we keep using those words, we really need to practice the art of changing quickly, because that's really what it means. And understanding that there are going to be changes that happen, and we need to be realistic and forthcoming and empathetic with those we work with, so that we get a true story of what's happening. Because at the end of the day, like, when you put out a bunch of dates and deadlines, how often are they actually hit? We really want to get a truer picture of what's happening. And we're not going to really get that unless we have people really showing up and really feeling like they can say, you know what, I think that this is a bad idea. Maybe we shouldn't go in that direction. And those are great ideas. Like, again, that's why we're hiring people. We're hiring people to be innovative, to be creative, to make
that's what you hope.
Yeah, exactly.
Do you find what if you, like you mentioned, but you understand engineering. What if you're you're managing a team of people that you don't understand really the work they're doing. You don't know it that well, but you're managing it, right? So back to your days as a project manager, I've talked to a number of folks over the past few years that work in product, for example, and they don't know the engineering side or the design side as much. And they struggle with building those relationships with folks, and what would be your advice in that scenario? Because, sometimes the product person can be kind of put into a bad place.
Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, the most simple response I have to that is start talking to each other and start
Hmm.
really talking to each other. And what I mean by that is also recognizing that you're speaking two different languages. I think I recognize that, a few years into coaching when, I mean, I had dabbled in coding, but really my strength was with the people side of coaching. I really recognized that like I wasn't going to understand something until I really understood it. So having product and having engineers actually sit down and talk through what's happening is such a powerful thing. I have witnessed engineers who really don't speak up a lot normally when
Yeah.
someone from product comes to them and says, can you explain to me why this wouldn't work or why this would be a bad idea? I have seen so much brilliance and so much like awesome collaboration come out of those conversations because they're like, yeah, well, it's not about dumbing it down at all. It's really about making it a more human approach. And
Yep.
to me as a coach, I'm like silently clapping in the background. I'm like, yay, you guys are actually
Hmm.
putting product and engineering together. That is the human piece of it.
Yep.
You are really at the core, at the root of that. Now you're speaking the same language, and now you're going to be able to deliver something that you both understand more clearly.
Right. And you got to have resilience too, because you can't imagine just that first, just because you walk in and like, okay, today I'm going to ask them questions about why this works, and you get a weird reaction. You've got to have some resilience. You can't imagine like you can change the culture of a team overnight, right?
Completely. And that's such an important thing to call out. I try to consider myself a realistic optimist. But this is not easy stuff. Humans are messy. We are complicated. We have biases. We have all this stuff going
Yeah.
on. And if we're really trying to move forward in terms of building great things with great people and having great products, we need to practice agility with ourselves, which also kind of goes back to the whole continuous improvement, right?
Hmm.
Maybe the first conversation, there was an architect I used to work with who had this like reputation of being super scary. And I was completely freaked out to talk to this person. I was like, okay, everybody is just like, not comfortable with this conversation. And as a manager, I have to go talk to them. And the first few conversations were super awkward. And I think part of it was because I had bias. And I think
Hmm.
part of it was
Sure.
because they didn't know what to expect. So they were kind of, a little cagey about it.
Yep.
But the more that we practiced talking with one another, the easier it got. And it also got easier to be honest. Because
Yep.
I think first and foremost, also don't it's important to call out that while it's a really good point that these conversations aren't always going to go well the first time, but like, don't beat yourself up so much and think that, it's never going to get better. It's
Right.
going to get better. It's just
Yep.
like, it's like when you have even like a puppy or like playing in a band together. Like, I worked with David Hussman for years at Dev Jam and he always loved to say, when you first play together as a band, you sound like crap. But
Yep.
the more you practice
Yep.
and the more you play, the better you get. The same thing is true with humans. Like the more you get to know someone, the more you get to understand their behavior, the ins and outs. And also like added bonus, you also get to like learn more cool stuff.
Yep.
So there's
Yep.
there's a lot of great things that come out of digging a little deeper.
Yeah, and you've got to also focus while you're focusing on the team. You also got to focus on self-care as well, right? And however that works for you, if you need to charge your crystals by the moonlight, or if you like to take long walks, or you like to eat things that are bad for you, I don't know, whatever the case may be, like you do need to make time for that self-care. I've found that's really important because you can get so consumed and sucked up into fixing this team or working with this team, and you don't realize, like, because you're not doing the self-care work, you're bringing negative energy along with you, and that could be a detriment, right?
Completely. It's huge. So,
Yeah.
and I'm just kind of fumbling for words because this happened to me, and it happened to a lot of people during the pandemic. I'm working
Oh
fully
yeah,
remote
right.
now, and I had moments where I was like pushing, having all these expectations for myself, and eventually I was just like, I don't think I'm bringing my best self to the table. So I've tried to start doing something where at the end of the week, it's just the silly little thing that I've always done, but like on top of just kind of cleaning up my desk, kind of reflecting on where I'm at and trying to gauge like am I taking enough time for myself? Are my boundaries in check? I think boundaries are very important right now. I hear a lot of conversations that still happen where people are saying, I'm working 12-hour days. I haven't had a vacation since January. And unfortunately, much like you said about like, just having someone drop into the space and do stuff for you, nobody's going to give you permission. Come in and say, you know what, you should do this thing. If you do build a really great relationship with a leader or a colleague, maybe they'll come to you and say it. But at the end of the day, we're ultimately kind of responsible for making sure that we're able to take care of ourselves the best way that we know how. And to your point, that might just mean, taking like a long weekend, or I would actually challenge folks to do more than that. And I also know I need to eat my own dog food when I say that. Because now, people will be like, well, I'll take a few days off. And sometimes that's great. Sometimes that's enough to just kind of like relieve things. But sometimes you really need a break, and just like, don't check your work email every night, or start incrementally. Start small. Say, what's one thing that I could maybe cut out that's an unhealthy practice? Like for me, it's always been before bed checking my email. That has always been a thing for me. And it's something that I just eliminated doing. I said, it's not healthy for me. It's not productive. I'm not going to be able to do anything until the morning anyway. So why don't I just wait and give myself space so that I have time to, hang out with family and my pug and, take a bike ride or whatever it is, so that I can come back more refreshed. Because I think that I hear these, I saw somebody make a comment on LinkedIn. It was so brilliant. I wish I could remember it. It was like bowing to the altar of productivity, basically.
Right. Yes.
So like, well, I worked 12 hours yesterday. Well, I worked 14.
the toxic hustle culture that's out there.
Yeah, it's not a cute look, and it's not doing any of us any good right now. If there's anything that we've learned over the past year and a half, is that we are human, and enjoying life matters. It matters so much. And for us to really enjoy what we do, we need to be able to take breaks. And to kind of play into psychological safety, you have to be in a safe enough environment to say, I need a break. I'm really burnt out, and have support from people and not judgment. I even hear people jokingly say, like when someone says, I'm going to take a vacation, and they'll say, what? You got allowed to take a vacation? They're joking, but it's like, there's some reality under there.
Exactly.
They feel like they can't. And that's a real thing. And I really encourage people to start having those conversations. Like, no, we can't all take vacation at once. We need to keep the lights on. But what can that look like from a sustainability perspective? Because it's really just a matter of having a conversation. And it's one that I think needs to happen more often.
Yeah. Like I said, the self-care piece, and like you had highlighted, if you're waiting for other people to show up with self-care for yourself, again, they're not going to do it,
Not going to be there. Nope.
And so, you've got to do it yourself. And you've also, got to take some more charge and responsibility for your time as well. I mean, if you're having multiple hour-long meetings throughout the day, asking people, can we make these things 15 minutes? Do they need to be an hour? Like, always protecting that time and not just letting your job and letting your work just happen to you. Having a voice in it, a say in it. And I think that goes back to like our original topic here is psychological safety. You do want your team to feel safe in bringing those types of things up. I want my team to come to me and say, could this meeting have just been an email?
Right.
Oh, you know what?
Exactly.
Maybe it could have been. I would be fine with that. And I hope that I can instill that in my team. And much like we've been talking about, there's not a one and done sort of thing. This is a constant grooming that needs to happen over the course, because, I've always found that showing some vulnerability as a leader helps other people feel more comfortable in sharing their vulnerabilities as well, or things that are triggers for them. And, but back to your point, if I don't do that, I'm not going to get the best ideas from people, because they're not going to share things that are outside of whatever I have determined is okay. through somewhat whatever audio visual cue that I've given them, right? Because it's never like, I've talked to so many leaders where they're like, the team won't share these ideas, you know, and then I see them like stomping around from meeting to meeting, like with two phones, like buy, sell, buy, sell. And it's like, nobody's going to stop you in the middle of that crap and be like, hey, I've got an idea, you know? So back to your point about being very self-aware, it's super important.
Right, it is. And it's also like, I get for some people, probably pretty scary because it might not be something that you've ever been used to or that you felt has ever been accepted. And the bottom line is, I mean, we need to show up for one another in that way and be honest about it, even when, especially when it's uncomfortable. And that doesn't mean you're like oversharing your life, but it means when something is impacting you, you say something about it and you say, or like to your point, when someone comes to you and says, you know, I really feel like that conversation could have been like simply done in an email. Like that might be really scary for someone to say. For one person, it might not be. For others, it might really be. So how can we start to reinforce that behavior? And that's a lot of the conversations that we've been having at Industrial Logic, myself with my colleagues. Like, you hear so much talk about psychological safety, and I was so excited to be able to actually have something to measure it. And it's like, now what do you do? Right. So like, you know the word, you know what it means. Now you've recognized, okay, we're super not safe. What do we do about it? So now it's really about identifying some ways to put things into practice, because like everything else, it's a practice and it's not going to feel super comfortable right away, but over time it pays off so much because you're able to be more yourself. You're going to be less stressed. You don't feel like you have to have this wall up or this curtain up where you have to be one person at work. And then, you know, once you get off a call, you let out this like huge sigh, not saying I've never done that, but you know, I mean, really being able to say, you know, the more that I can bring to the table as myself, the less rigid it's going to feel for me. And the more that I'm actually going to be able to get out of the work that I do.
I love it all. I could talk to you all day, Tara, but we're going to have to cut it off short here. And, but you're going to come back on. I know, we'll have you back on because I always enjoy our conversations. If I want to know more about you and the work you do, where should I go? Where should I find more info on how I can get somebody like Tara to come and help me?
Absolutely. So please go to our website. You can go to industriallogic.com. And also I will provide some links in the YouTube chat. So we are actually hosting 4 free community chats about these 4 dimensions that I talked about that are measurable from the psychological safety scan. The first one is going to be around risk and fear, and that is in September, and that's coming up here pretty quick. And then we're also hosting our first public workshop that's going to be a really deep dive into some of this stuff and have a lot of cool dynamic stuff where teams are going to be able to interact with one another, and individuals can bring things back to their leadership and their teams and really start to dig into how they can put these things into practice. So I'm happy to share those links as well. Awesome.
Yeah, no, I look forward to that. I like I said, I think the work that you and the folks over there are doing is amazing. And so I appreciate you taking the time, and I hope to have you back on soon.
Thank you so much, Kurt. This has been awesome.
Oh, thank you. My pleasure. All right, everyone. Thank you for taking the time to join me today. As I mentioned at the top of the show, speaking of psychological safety, why not come and work at Foundry where there's oodles? I mean, it's grooming. We're working on it all the time. But like I mentioned, I really appreciate all of you who took the time today to join me. It's been a fantastic conversation, and I definitely suggest you go on and check out everything that Tara does. Follow her on LinkedIn. She puts out some amazing content as well. I just appreciate you for joining me, and there's going to be another live show this Thursday, so I will see you then.